the United Kingdom, the UK, they're now moving forward with experiments to quote-unquote dim the sun. And this is going to carry out controversial programs on what's known as solar geoengineering. We've talked about it before on this show. There are many programs on it. I want to explain what it is. These are concepts being developed to fight alleged global warming, and they want to do so by reducing the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth. And there's a lot of ways they do it. The Telegraph says this. It says experiments to dim sunlight to fight global warming will be given the green light by the government in the UK within weeks. It says outdoor field trials, which could include injecting aerosols into the atmosphere or brightening clouds to reflect sunshine, are being considered by scientists as a way to prevent runaway climate change. It says ARIA, this is one of the organizations, that's the government's Advanced Research and Invention Funding Agency in the UK, has set aside £50 million for projects which will be announced in the coming weeks. It says Professor Mark Symes, the program director for ARIA, it's the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, said there would be small, controlled outdoor experiments on particular approaches, and added, we will be announcing who we have given funding to in a few weeks, and when we do so, we will be making clear when any outdoor experiments might be taking place, he said, and added, one of the missing pieces in this debate was physical data from the real world, meaning they're actually doing it. And they say models can only tell us so much. It notes as well that geoengineering projects which seek to artificially alter the climate have proven controversial, as you might imagine. It says with critics arguing they could bring damaging knock-on effects as well as being unhelpful distractions from lowering emissions. Now, according to The Guardian, this £50 million UK government-funded program, which is equivalent to about $67 million US, it will provide critical data needed to assess the potential of the technology. The program, along with another £11 million project, will make the UK one of the biggest funders of geoengineering projects in the world. Now look, there have been a few major proposals on solar geoengineering over the years. If you think this is controversial, newsflash, there are companies already doing it. There are some already doing it as we speak. This ranges anywhere from using chemicals to make clouds more reflective to lessen the amount of sunlight, meaning it shines that sunlight right back into space, to even larger things like launching barriers into space that can reduce the amount of sunlight that can reach the Earth. Notably, the World Economic Forum was promoting one of those programs. Now, look, I know some of this sounds kind of far out, but remember, there were experiments like this conducted in Mexico a couple years back. Researchers in Mexico, they're a U.S. company, they were basically inspired by the 1991 volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. That's kind of like the model a lot of this is based on. Volcano erupts in the Philippines. It sent massive amounts of sulfur dioxide into the air. It killed a lot of people. But it also had the effect of reducing sunlight. And a lot of scientists looked at that and said, wow, that reduced sunlight, maybe we can use it to fight global warming. Some scientists want to replicate the effect of a volcanic eruption artificially. And they've actually tried it out on small scales already. Some companies already do it actively, and they actually use it to sell products. Carbon credits, they call them. Now, the programs ended up being so controversial, Mexico actually banned them. Popular Mechanics, January 2023, they said this. In late 2022, the startup Make Sunsets, that's the company, one of the companies doing this, announced that it was injecting small amounts of aerosols into the stratosphere as an experiment in solar geoengineering. It says the company released 2 weather balloons from Baja California that were filled with less than 10 grams of SO2 each, not exactly Pinatubo levels, the volcano. But it said, but last week the Mexican government banned the controversial deployment of any solar geoengineering efforts, citing a 2010 moratorium developed at a United Nations conference on biodiversity. It says Make Sunsets, the company, is already, as we speak, selling cooling credits. Remember this phrase, cooling credits. They sell them for $10 per gram of SO2. And it says a similar business model to the also controversial carbon offsets, carbon credits. Now it says this: Mexico and the rest of the world has reason to worry about solar geoengineering, although its effectiveness, as seen in Punatubo, but also other global cooling periods in the distant past, can't be debated. The potential side effects of intentionally pumping the stratosphere with SO2 are disastrous. For one, scientists think that over time the skies would transform from blue to white, while sunsets would become dazzlingly bright. Make sunsets, right? As volcanoes tend to do. It says sulfur dioxide is also the same stuff pumping from power plants around the world, and this kind of geoengineering would likely induce the usual bevy of bad side effects like ozone depletion, acid rain, and respiratory illnesses. So they ban power plants from doing this and replace them with non-sustainable, sustainable energy. And then they create products to do the exact same emissions as the power plants they say that are damaging and polluting, and then use that to sell you products which you can use to offset your carbon emissions. That's business for you folks. Now, let me actually show you a quick clip of how this works. It's literally giant balloons. They inject them with sulfur dioxide. They launch them into space, well, the stratosphere, and then they burst. Watch this. Now, look, briefly on this, a lot of people might say, oh, well, what does it matter? You know, you inject aerosols into the stratosphere. It goes away after a little bit. The reason these companies inject these things into the stratosphere and not the atmosphere, or like, you know, lower down, the reason they do that is because it actually does stay there. It can stay there for much, much longer. And so this actually does have a very long-term impact. Now, look, briefly, though, on the note of these cooling credits, right? They call them cooling credits. The company's selling cooling credits by the gram. That doesn't mean that businesses are buying grams of like this chemical, right? The way it's done is this. They inject certain amounts of this stuff into the stratosphere, maybe X amount of grams, and then they sell that to companies to offset their carbon footprint, like hypothetically speaking, like a company sponsors it basically. The way this works, this ties into the for-profit element of climate change. There's a huge business and a huge investment area around climate change. It's a money-making scheme when it comes to this. Basically, this is how it works. Companies can purchase what they call carbon credits, or in this case, cooling credits, and they can use those credits to reach what they call net zero, meaning they have zero emissions. That doesn't mean that they actually emit nothing. It actually means that they just offset it by purchasing these grams or whatever else credits from these companies. An oil company, for example, that is determined to have, an X amount of carbon emissions, they'll have to buy an equivalent amount of carbon credits or cooling credits to offset their emissions. So if they, let's say a small number, if they emit like 50 grams of carbon emissions every single day, they're going to have to buy 50 grams of carbon emissions or cooling credits from one of these companies. And these companies have all kinds of crazy things they do. There's all kinds of them. They basically look for ways where they can claim to reduce carbon emissions. That could be something like pulling carbon from the air. They have what they call carbon capture facilities, and they actually capture carbon, and then they use machines for it. They have these already built in the United States. There are proposals to cut down trees and bury the wood under the narrative that if a tree were to hypothetically burn down in a forest fire, it would create a set amount of carbon emissions. Like, how many grams is a tree, right? And so they could say if the tree were to burn down, all of that, the tree, every gram of that tree would become a carbon emission. And so by cutting the tree down and burying the tree, they stop that carbon from being emitted, and then they can sell the weight of that buried tree as a carbon credit. This is how these companies work. They put together numbers for carbon credits or cooling credits, then they sell them to other companies. A lot of big corporations have to buy them, and even some states, by the way, in order to, again, have the net zero goal. It's a huge investment area. I actually know people who work in this area. It's a huge investment area. There's tons of money in it. And some of these also get government funding, state subsidies in other parts of the world. It's not even just the US, it's like China and stuff. There are a lot of concerns around these programs themselves, like obviously, because some of these proposals, you don't really know the long-term effects of it. Like, what does it mean if you're pulling carbon out of the air? Like, what does that do to the area? There's also some companies that are a lot less credible. Because while you could say that maybe in the US there's certain environmental standards, some countries don't have that. And so in China, for example, they have, like global warming fighting companies, and there's not a lot of stuff really vetting them. But companies can buy them and they count as credits, and so they can actually use this to offset it. Again, this is a huge business. This is part of how the whole net zero and climate change program makes money. It's a business. It's a huge investment area. A lot of investment firms are behind it. This is a huge money-making system under the narrative of climate change. That's how it works. And now look, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they announced just last week they're actually looking into these programs. They're concerned about them, specifically the company Make Sunsets. That's the company I mentioned before that's launching the balloons to inject sulfur dioxide into the air. The EPA said this in an official statement. It said the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA Office of Air and Radiation, OAR, submitted a demand for information to a startup company calling themselves Make Sunsets, which is launching balloons filled with sulfur dioxide seeking to geoengineer the planet and generate cooling credits to sell. Again, they're selling them, right? It's a business. They say this issue was initially identified in 2023 during the last administration. The Biden administration actually did do some studies on this, but it said no action was taken to find out more about this questionable startup and activity. And notes that EPA Administrator Zeldin said, quote, the idea that individuals supported by venture capitalists, as I mentioned, there's a huge investment business behind this, are putting criteria air pollutants into the air to sell cooling credits shows how climate extremism is overtaking common sense. Again, the things they're injecting into the air to fight climate change are some of the same exact emissions from the power plants they've tried to shut down because they've alleged the emissions are causing climate change. Let that sink in. Anyways, Lee Zeldin continues stating this. He said, based on Make Sunset's responses to our information requests, we will look into all our authorities to ensure that we will continue maintaining clean air for all Americans. Now look, according to the company's website, Make Sunsets, they've already launched around 147 balloons. It says they've delivered over 128,000 so-called cooling credits. Personally, I doubt this company is going to single-handedly cause a volcanic eruption type scenario where you block the sun. But the concern is if this continues spreading, right? And this is raising some questions over exactly what they've been doing, any potential impacts these programs may have had on the environment. Again, there's not enough studies on this for long-term impact. They do state on their website, quote, we hope you'll join our journey by purchasing a cooling credit, signing up for our newsletter, or partnering with us. Let's work together to cool our planet for future generations. Again, there are a lot of people who believe the climate change narrative, and they view this as saving the world. There are many people who believe that. But back to the experiment soon to be underway in the UK, right, the United Kingdom. It also comes with a lot of controversies, as you would imagine. There are concerns that reducing sunlight could have a detrimental impact on the world. Maybe even like a pseudo-Armageddon type scenario. Maybe not that severe, but based on human civilization and human history, we've seen what happens when there have been massive volcanic eruptions. especially if you have the machine of business behind it, and there's no brakes on that train, right? This is given the fact that sunlight has been shown in the past to, reducing sunlight. If you reduce the amount of sunlight, what happens? Well, crops die, farms fail. It can even cause plagues, diseases. Some of the worst times in human history were the times following massive volcanic eruptions when less sunlight was hitting the earth. You had disease, you had war, you had suffering, you had death and famine. But there are programs looking to effectively replicate that. Some companies want to artificially replicate that effect. You could argue maybe not that severe. The question is, well, what determines when they hit the brakes on it, and what stops them from continue doing it indefinitely, right? Their argument is that they, got to fight global warming. They're saving the world, even if it means damaging, some other things. One of the major proposals for this that actually went viral a few years back. This was tied to an experiment funded by, in part by billionaire Bill Gates, and it was to spray aerosols into the stratosphere. They wanted to use big jets to do it, fly high, and inject these things into the stratosphere. Some people said it's, chemtrails or whatever. Technically it was, but they were doing this actually. They ran experiments on it. CNBC covered this. This was not a conspiracy theory. Let me show you their actual video. This is September 2019. Watch.
Meanwhile, Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
How long will it be that countries keep experiencing these climate impacts before someone gets desperate and says, hey, we need to cool the planet with solar geoengineering?
It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth. Back in 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines. It was the largest eruption to affect a densely populated area, creating avalanches and giant mud flows that left more than 700 dead and 30,000 homeless. It also spewed a cloud of 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide particles into the stratosphere. That chemical cloud was hundreds of miles across and reflected about 2% of sunlight back to space. And in 1992, the Earth was cooler than in 1991.
That is part of the mechanism, but you do this in a controlled way.
Modelling studies have found that it could reduce the intensity of heat waves, for instance. Apparently it could reduce the rate of sea level rise. It could reduce the intensity of tropical storms.
But it also comes with significant risks and uncertainties.
Things like mass famine, mass flooding, drought, of kinds that will affect very large populations.
It could weaken.
Now, to be clear, experiments like this have continued. This was not like a one-off thing. Just last year, for example, researchers tested a small-scale program in San Francisco, right here in the good old US of A, folks. The experiment was actually done on the deck of a US aircraft carrier. The Biden administration, they actually issued a statement at the time saying that the government was not involved in that experiment because it was controversial. Although a couple years prior, 2023, the previous administration released a public report in the United States about solar geoengineering and similar programs, saying they're effectively researching it. Does not mean they were doing it, but they were researching it. They were not announcing plans to actually test the technologies, but there were public reports on this. Now, U.S. Congress also had a report on the proposed technologies for solar geoengineering also back in 2023. And it discussed most of the main proposals going around, right? They kind of analyzed it. Will this be good? Will it be bad? And there were reports on it. It also noted some of the potential risks and explored whether there were any laws blocking these types of programs. Because, one of the concerns is, you can ban it in the United States, but what's going to stop another country from doing it, like the UK, for example? Just recently also, Florida took actions to ban these types of programs. This was just recently. In fact, this is still going through. Several U.S. states are looking to ban these types of programs, including cloud seeding, which is something they use to induce rain, for example. It's called conspiracies. Some states are looking to ban it, and the people who say it's conspiracies are saying it's a conspiracy, but you can't stop us from doing it, which is a bit weird. But look, a lot of news outlets have somewhat misrepresented this. They allege that Florida, the Senate was basically banning, conspiratorial programs on chemtrails and things like that. They misrepresented these programs as, chemtrails. CNN reported in late March that, quote, an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory that claims the U.S. government is controlling the weather or its citizens by spraying dangerous chemtrails from airplanes has now made its way into several state legislatures where it could manifest into real-life laws. And there's actually more to that, as you would imagine. The measure was actually passed in the Florida Senate. It's now in the House in Florida at the state level. And basically what that does, again, if you read the actual law and you're not just writing whatever, right? What it actually does, it prohibits any person or corporation from engaging in geoengineering or weather modification. So that would include things like cloud seeding, which they use to induce rain. There are a lot of programs like that. It's actually very common in countries like Dubai. China does it all the time. It would also include any potential programs in things like solar geoengineering. And it also makes it a third-degree felony if an aircraft controller or operator does this. And they could be punished by up to 5 years in prison. They get a $5,000 fine. It's a relatively serious crime if this passes the House and gets signed into law. It also makes it generally illegal to inject or release chemicals or other substances into the atmosphere to impact the climate. And that's the actual technicality of the law. This is not about like chemtrails or anything like that, right? Although it would hypothetically include that if that's a thing. While programs like this, though, are banned in Mexico, several U.S. states are looking to ban them. To be clear, they're not illegal everywhere. There are many areas in the world this is not illegal. Many areas in the world are doing it, and many areas in the world are looking to experiment with it. The United Kingdom, for example, again, they are now moving forward with experimenting on solar geoengineering to, quote-unquote, dim the sun. Now look, folks, in other news, it's possible Donald Trump could still be around for quite a while. The official retail website of the Trump Organization, they've now launched their merchandise for the Trump 2028 presidential campaign. Let me show you this. Look, a page for the Trump 2028 hat states, "The future looks bright, rewrite the rules," suggesting the Constitution, I assume. With the Trump 2028 high crown hat, fully embroidered with a snap closure in the back, this will become your new go-to hat. They've also made t-shirts and other, Trump 2028 merchandise. I think they even made like reusables. They even made like plastic straws last I checked. Anyways, it notes that the hat is made in America, not made in China. Some people pointed out that, these made in China companies, they're doing these TikTok videos like, look at this MAGA hat made in China. Most of those goods in those videos are actually Chinese counterfeits. A lot of these products are made in America. The ones made in China are counterfeits. All you have is these Chinese bootleggers effectively like showing their hands. But also this hat, this 2028 hat, back to this, due to high demand, you will have to allow for 5 to 10 business days just to process the shipment. So apparently a lot of people are buying their Trump 2028 hats. Now on this point, look, I don't know if they're joking or not. It's actually hard to tell sometimes. This might be a joke. It's written like a joke. Trump has discussed the possibility of running for a third term as president in 2028. Maybe even after that, some have suggested he could run again even after 2028. Now, critics have noted that the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution could make that a little bit difficult, let's say, because the Constitution does limit a person being elected president. You can only be elected twice. Trump, a lot of others have said, well, you being elected president, but there are ways around that effectively. Maybe there's a war, for example. Maybe you want to, put elections on hold because there's a war. That is a thing. There could also be things like, for example, some groups are looking into exceptions. The most basic exception would be Trump runs as vice president. He's the running mate for whoever is going to be president in 2028. Maybe it's his son or one of his sons. Maybe it's J.D. Vance. Who knows, right? Maybe it's Ron DeSantis or, who knows, Ted Cruz, for example. Someone else could run for president. Trump could be the running mate, vice president, and if they win, the running mate resigns after winning. Trump, vice president, becomes president because that's the way the whole system works. In that hypothetical case, Trump would be the president yet again. There's also the possibility that they could go even after that, hypothetically speaking, if Trump were to become like the Speaker of the House. And remember, if Republicans had a supermajority in the House, they don't have to appoint a member of the House to that position. But hypothetically speaking, if the president and the vice president were to resign or something happened to them, the presidency then goes to the Speaker of the House. And if the House, run by Republicans, decided to put Trump in that position, they could make him president again. So maybe we could get 4 more terms if they wanted to. It would be really controversial if they did, but look, Trump's joking about it. Let me rephrase that. Trump is talking about it. Some people think he's joking and some people don't think he's joking. A lot of us thought he was joking about making Canada a U.S. state. I don't think he's joking. I think he's dead serious about it. Same thing with Greenland. He's not joking. So we will see if he's joking or not come 2028, apparently. Now, folks, on to another topic, though. The first criminal charged for terrorism against a Venezuelan gang member has now been officially brought forward by the U.S. Department of Justice. This is important. Remember, the government recently classified the Mexican cartels, the gangs MS-13, Tren de Aragua, as terrorist organizations. I think there were a lot of questions on, well, how far are they going to go with that? Are they going to charge people with terrorism for being gang members? The answer now is yes. Not only that, but they're also using some of the international powers that come alongside a terror designation. They're even going after these people in other countries. They are, in fact, using the full breadth of a terror designation to go after these gangs, these cartels, and these organizations. Epoch Times said this: the Department of Justice on April 23rd added terrorism-related charges to the criminal case against an alleged high-ranking member of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang. In a newly unsealed indictment against Jose Enrique Martinez Flores, the Justice Department is pursuing terrorism charges against an alleged member of the notorious Tren de Aragua gang for the first time. Now, note that Martinez Flores, 24, also known as Chiqui, was charged with conspiring to provide and providing material support to a designated terrorist, a foreign terrorist organization, according to his indictment. Get that. Not even being a member of a terror group, but providing material support. Now you might wonder, what is the material support this individual provided to Tren de Aragua in another country? This is not even in the U.S. They say this was filed in a federal court in the Southern District of Texas. He was also charged with conspiracy and distribution of cocaine in Colombia intended for distribution in the United States. Briefly on this, the material support he's providing is drugs. This now means that gang members or any person involved in the drug trade could face terrorism charges for being involved in the drug trade. Because where do the drugs go? Well, they go through gangs and they go through cartels, which are now designated as terrorist organizations. And even bigger than that, guess where this guy was arrested? He was arrested in Colombia. Colombian authorities, it says here, arrested Martinez Flores in Colombia on March 31st after the United States requested a provisional warrant for his arrest. He is still in Colombian custody, quote, pending further proceedings. This is big, folks. Look, FBI Director Kash Patel said in a Justice Department press release that, quote, TDA, Tren de Aragua, is a direct threat to our national security, to our communities, and to Americans. Together with our law enforcement partners, the FBI continues our pursuit to eliminate this violent terrorist organization from our streets, and today's announcement makes it clear that these criminals, especially the leaders of these cartels, have no place in our country. Now, on that point as well, we talk about the threat of terrorism. How many people have been killed in the United States by terrorists? I mean, no small number, but if you think about how many people have been killed by drugs, killed by the cartels, killed by fentanyl, it is incomparably massive. The point here being that actually these gangs do pose more of a threat to human life than most terrorist groups have, at least in the United States. Now, interestingly, though, on these releases, they note the man was arrested in Colombia by local authorities. And this suggests, my analysis, other countries are now cooperating with the United States to go after the gangs, because the gangs are now designated as terrorist organizations, foreign terrorist groups. The release notes the investigation was carried out by the FBI, but with the help from Houston Police Department, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, again county, Colombian National Police, and the Colombian Attorney General's Office. Now, on Colombia, the drug trade there, especially cocaine, is not deemed controversial. The problem you have in some of these countries is because drug trade is so common that it's infiltrated the police, it's infiltrated the government, it's infiltrated the legal systems. Sometimes the government works hand in glove with the cartels. Donald Trump is getting around this and going after these gangs. One of the statements he made when he launched this is something really important. Trump actually threatened the governments of every country if they do not cooperate with the activities to go after these gangs. And effectively what he said is that any country that impedes the United States on going after these cartels and the drug trade and these gangs, any country that impedes, he said the United States will expose their ties to the drug trade. And if you understand what that means, that this is normal in a lot of these countries, and you have a lot of corruption in a lot of these countries, a lot of them are guilty. Trump is effectively saying he will not go after the corrupt officials who have been working with the cartels with the condition that they cooperate with us when we go after them. I don't know if that's the case with the arrest we just saw in Colombia, but I think that's important context with this. Now, the FBI release, this whole thing, or the Justice Department, it also notes that Flores, this man, he faces a sentence of life in prison, also a $10 million fine. It also notes the program is part of Operation Take Back America, which it describes as, quote, a nationwide initiative that marshals the full resources of the Department of Justice to repel the invasion of illegal immigration, to achieve the total elimination of cartels and transnational criminal organizations, and protect our communities from the perpetrators of violent crime, meaning these gangs, of course, and people tied to them. Now, right alongside this also, the Department of Justice rolled out other major charges. This was not a standalone. They did a whole bunch of stuff all at once. Other major charges, particularly against Tren de Aragua, this whole gang, and also their affiliates, not even people directly tied to it. They actually used RICO charges, racketeering. This suggests anybody, even tied to the criminal activities by extension, could face criminal charges. Epoch Times said this: the Department of Justice on April 21st announced that 27 alleged members or affiliates of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had been charged under legislation designated to bring down criminal enterprises. Now, the affiliates part here is important. The way gangs work, the way the cartels work, the way the drug trade works, the way that a lot of these criminal organizations work. You have the gangs, but the gangs work with a lot of people who are not part of those gangs. The cartels might bring the drugs in, the cartels distribute those drugs to gangs, the gangs distribute the drugs to just random people and random criminals. If you are an affiliate, meaning you're working in the drug trade basically at this point, you could now be designated as somebody giving material support to designated terrorist organizations. That's how serious this is, because racketeering, RICO. And this is a charge specifically on that. It says this: the allegations against those charged included committing robberies and shooting, sex trafficking, organized prostitution of women brought into the United States illegally from Venezuela, robbing and extorting small businesses, and trafficking a drug called 2C, which contains ketamine, which is like a cat tranquilizer, that the DOJ described as the gang's calling card in a statement announcing the charges. Now look, in addition to this, a large group of individuals was also arrested in Oregon, and they're being accused of working for the Sinaloa drug cartel. So not just TDA, also one of the cartels directly. That is also now a designated terrorist organization. Let me show you the official release. This is from the DEA. It says this: Honduran drug traffickers working for the Sinaloa cartel infiltrated Portland, Oregon, flooding the area with deadly fentanyl and other drugs. The focus of this investigation was to interrupt the open-air drug market in Multnomah County. It says in a coordinated effort to protect the public from the deadly impact of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs, the DEA Portland District Office in that area, in collaboration with the Portland Police Bureau, the County Sheriff's Office, and also the county's District Attorney's Office, and the FBI, and also the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the highest intensity drug trafficking area program, meaning this was a massive operation, conducted a series of drug enforcement missions in the first quarter of 2025 that led to significant results. It notes, in addition to numerous arrests, law enforcement partners seized substantial amounts of fentanyl powder and pills, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. It says firearms and cash were seized as well. Driven by a sharp commitment to community safety, these joint missions resulted in 46 arrests, 20 firearms seized, $204,007 in cash seized, 44 pounds of fentanyl powder seized, 2,507 fentanyl pills seized, 22 pounds of methamphetamine seized, 9 pounds of cocaine, 2 pounds of heroin, and they got it all. Now look, the White House also issued a statement on the programs now being launched. In an official post on X, the White House said this, quote, "Not hard to follow. Cross illegally, join a gang, get deported, end of story." And alongside that statement, the White House released an illustration of this. They published an easy-to-follow cartoon. And it shows a man illegally crossing the U.S. border with, barbed wire on the ground. The man joins a gang. He gets MS-13 tattooed on his chest. He gets arrested, and then he gets sent to a prison in El Salvador. The White House drew a picture for them so that they can easily understand. He's making a picture book for the gangs, right? Now look, in addition to the investigations now being carried out by the FBI, the DEA, international law enforcement, local law enforcement, a lot of stuff, all now cooperating with the United States, the U.S. military is also getting involved. It was actually announced recently a U.S. combat ship recently captured about $12 million in narcotics. This is common defense. So the military is involved, folks. They're doing it. They say its deployment in support of U.S. Naval Forces Southern Command, meaning south of the United States, meaning border security, and assignment to Commander Task Force 45 enables it to contribute to missions focused on disrupting illicit trafficking and enhancing regional security cooperation, meaning you got to work with us or we're going to expose how you're tied to the cartels. Task Force 45 is the surface component of the 4th Fleet and leads operations that build maritime partnerships with nations throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. It says key to the mission's success was the presence of a Coast Guard law enforcement detachment, LEDET, embarked on the ship. It says these LEDET teams are often assigned to Navy vessels to provide law enforcement authority and expertise during counter-narcotics missions. Again, the Coast Guard does a lot of these operations. They have for a long time. It says this, though, drug interdictions in the Caribbean are carried out under the authority of the Coast Guard's 7th District, headquartered in Miami, in Florida. Now, in addition to the expanding campaigns against cartels and gangs now designated as terrorist groups, the Trump administration is also taking a stronger stance against crimes being committed by illegal immigrants in general, including when local courts have otherwise lenient policies in place. I'll be talking about this after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The Trump administration is taking a much stronger stance against crimes being committed by illegal immigrants, including when local courts have otherwise lenient policies in place. You might have seen the recent case. A judge and his wife were arrested just recently, and they're accused of effectively harboring a member of TDA, Tren de Aragua. They posted photos together. The judge and his wife have now been arrested. And among the other cases is a recent one in California. A Mexican illegal immigrant was driving drunk. He killed a young couple. They were both 19 years old. He decided he just wanted to drink and drive back in 2021. He was sentenced to prison. He was convicted, but he was released from jail more than 6 years short of his sentence. And now, well, the federal government has stepped in. Epoch Times said this. It said Oscar Eduardo Ortega Angiano was recently granted early release after being convicted of killing a California couple in a crash while driving intoxicated in 2021. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, has placed a detainer on the illegal immigrant, and he will immediately be transferred into ICE custody, the agency confirmed on April 23rd. They said, quote, twice deported illegal alien from Mexico, Oscar Eduardo Ortega Antiago, is serving time after being convicted of gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, which resulted in the deaths of an American couple, 19 years old, folks. ICE said in a statement on X, and added, quote, his previous criminal convictions. This guy was not like a one-time drinking and driving guy. His previous criminal convictions, it says, quote, include burglary in 2005, vehicle theft in 2007, and battery on a spouse with kidnapping in 2014. So you had a guy committed burglary, stole a vehicle, beat up a spouse, kidnapped somebody, and then killed 2 young Americans while drinking and driving, and got a little slap on the wrist sentence. You know, it was pretty big at first. It said he served just 3 years of a 10-year sentence, the revolving door in the California legal system. They said ICE has now placed a detainer with the California Department of Corrections upon his release. Now they note as well, California Governor Gavin Newsom vowed to cooperate with ICE on the matter. So he's not trying to block this, it seems. They said, quote, after being deported in 2013, this individual unlawfully re-entered the U.S. and committed heinous crimes, the governor's office wrote in a statement. That's Governor Gavin Newsom. And they added, quote, a GOP DA, meaning a Republican district attorney. Gavin Newsom seems to be making a point here. This is not like a Democrat-Republican thing. A GOP Republican DA, he says, then gave him a plea deal instead of pursuing second-degree murder. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation will again coordinate with ICE, he said, as they have 10,000 plus inmates, to transfer him before release. And now it notes in California, if California does not comply with the ICE detainer, the Department of Justice is prepared to prosecute the case in federal court, according to the White House. Now, look, that is important, by the way, because look, California, they have sanctuary city laws. There's some, openings with this, as Gavin Newsom noted. They have in fact cooperated in over 10,000 cases. That's a lot of cases. That means, criminal aliens, people who've committed serious crimes, 10,000. But California has sanctuary city laws in place that typically forbid law enforcement from cooperating with immigration authorities. Basically, ICE intervening in this case means the man will likely be deported, will probably face additional criminal charges at the very least. We'll see. The Trump administration has been sentencing illegal immigrants for re-entry into the United States. Even just for, you get deported, you come back, they arrest you, they're making that a more serious crime. There are people now serving, usually like a few months in prison. Some are serving a few years. The highest has been like 20 years. So they are treating this more seriously now. Now, a similar incident to this also took place in Virginia, so this is not a one-off. An alleged illegal immigrant went to court in Virginia. His charges were dismissed. You're dismissed. Go ahead and go home, illegal immigrant. He was promptly arrested by ICE. There's actually a video of them actually going and grabbing this guy in the courtroom, dragging him out. Someone took it on their phone, so we don't have the rights to the video, but I can tell you about it, right? So it does seem to be the case. ICE is taking very strong actions against criminal aliens. They're expanding a lot of these operations internationally right now. You have ICE, Border Patrol, you have literally the military, you have the FBI, you have, I don't know about marshals, I haven't seen them engaged too much yet. You have local police, you have DAs, you have the sheriff's departments, and you even have foreign law enforcement and foreign DAs, even in countries where the drug trade is culturally accepted, now working together on this stuff. It is very broadly expanding, and we'll probably see it only grow from here, I would assume. In terms of normal illegal immigrants, the ones who do not commit crimes, the program of the Trump administration is, well, if we find you associating with these gang members, you're going to be arrested and deported right alongside with them. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you happen to be hanging out with your gang member friend, ICE kicks the door down and arrests your gang member friend, you're going with them. And of course, if you have the wrong tattoos even, you might get sent to El Salvador. So they are taking this much more seriously now. As for the rest of the illegal immigrants, the note being sent down from the Trump administration is effectively self-deport. And there's a lot of back and forth on that as well because they're facing legal challenges. There are federal judges blocking a lot of the Trump orders on that. A lot of federal judges are trying to prevent the Trump administration from deporting non-criminal aliens. The argument for the Trump administration is illegal entry into the United States, and even if they came here under amnesty or these other programs, that has now been revoked, meaning they are now illegally here. They're criminals as well, and that is the argument for the Trump administration. There are judges trying to stall that and block it. We will see what happens. That said, folks, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. All right, first off here, question about solar geoengineering in the United Kingdom. Silk Muller is saying, is that even legal? How can UK allow this to be done and ultimately affecting the rest of the world? Yeah. Okay, so to be clear, what the United Kingdom is doing is, I mentioned they have a government program. They're going to be giving grants of about £50 million. That's like 65, 67 million US dollars. You could argue for major scientific programs, it's not a lot of money, right? But they're going to be doing actual physical experiments. Now, some of those proposals, we don't know what they're going to be yet. They're going to be giving more information on that probably soon. I will keep you updated as this thing develops. The reality is, this stuff happens in the United States too, just nobody reports on it. It doesn't get a lot of coverage. Some of the companies now being investigated by like the Environmental Protection Agency, like, Make Sunsets is now facing some degree of investigation. The company doing the balloons with the aerosols. They've been operating. They've been selling these credits, cooling credits. Again, there's a huge business around this stuff. Okay, case in point. For Easter, I was spending time with my dad. We visited some family friends. One of the family friends works in an investment firm. They work on energy investment. So they work on all kinds of stuff. It could be oil futures. It could be like power, just energy and all that stuff. But because they work in investment for energy, they also sell carbon credits and cooling credits. And so he was telling me how the whole business works around this. He actually told me recently, Trump made a statement suggesting that he was critical of these types of programs, and it caused a huge sell-off on carbon credits. The market for carbon credits just borderline collapsed. He said it was so severe that a lot of the guys working in the industry almost had to be called in emergency at 11 o'clock at night. And so the business is still there, but it's a bit shaky right now because the Trump administration is working to kind of ban a lot of this stuff, or they're investigating it. But remember, if these programs are going to stay or go is not just a U.S. decision. It's going to have to be the whole world. And a lot of other countries, especially Europe, a lot of other countries are very much still fully behind these things. They're still fully invested in them. And the business is still there, right? There's still a very big business behind all this stuff. And even though, and remember, you can't fully blame these companies either, because if you're a business and you're an American business, let's say, you work in an industry deemed carbon not neutral or whatever, you're not reaching net zero, but you want to do business with Europe, like the UK or something like that, some of those countries have regulations on your carbon footprint. And so in order to even do business in certain countries, you basically have to buy these carbon credits. You call it what you will, whether you believe this is racketeering fundamentally, whether you would call this a criminal racket where people are mandating a business and pushing for a business to force businesses to pay money to something ridiculous, or whether you believe this is legitimately protecting us from global warming and probably going to save the world, Whichever side you believe, there is in fact a big system behind this, and it's not just the United States. There are a lot of laws in other countries that require it. On the point of the UK, this will probably start some more debates, because even within the context of these companies that do this kind of stuff, again, even the companies that do they call them carbon capture facilities. I did a whole episode on these maybe a year ago, I can't remember. I've reported on this before. They're building these things they have already built these things in the United States. Those things are controversial in and of themselves because, plants need carbon. That's the reality, right? That's why some people fertilize their gardens with coal and stuff. You need carbon. Plants consume it. They need it. And so if you're pulling it out of the air, you might affect plant life. You might damage the environment. At the very least, you're going to damage the local environment. And it seems ridiculous because a lot of these same people are the same ones who will go for a walk in the desert and find an endangered shrubbery and make it so the fire department can't do fire prevention operations and burn down half of Los Angeles, which is what happened, by the way. There was some guy in a nature walk and found an endangered shrubbery, and they used that as the basis to prevent the fire department from going and clearing the brush to stop fires, and then LA burns down. You'd think these same people who care about the endangered plants would want to protect the endangered plants from carbon capture facilities possibly damaging the entire environment, the entire ecosystem in a region. The issue is we don't really know the long-term effects of a lot of this. We don't really know what they do. It's a business, and it's not a very well-regulated business, frankly. In fact, I was even talking to my my family friend who works in this business, and he was telling me about some of the less credible organizations that do this. A lot of those are in other countries. So we're talking about the United Kingdom, we're talking about the US. You have less credible countries that sell carbon credits in countries like India or China or other countries. And, there might be less review, there might be less regulations. Sometimes it might be that they're doing, possibly dangerous programs. Sometimes it might be that they're not doing anything and they're just telling companies, yeah, we make carbon credits, buy them. They're like, what do you do? Like, none of your business. Don't ask, don't tell. And companies buy them and offset their credits. There's no standard in place on the investment side to regulate like the credibility of these organizations, at least not for the most part. And so, let's put it this way, the only standard in place is kind of like a little badge you can wear that says you're buying good quality credits. And that's pretty much the breadth of it. So huge business around this and not really well vetted. And to that point, I'd actually say that most Americans probably don't even know this exists. I would say most people probably don't even know that this is how the whole net zero business works. They don't even know there's a business around climate change, which is kind of funny because you have people saying, the millionaires and the billionaires and the big corporations. Like this is literally a big business. The climate groups are literally massive profitable businesses, and they're tied in with that whole system. It's a for-profit operation. Jeremy Barker, you're saying, LOL, laugh out loud. Just read today's topic. If anyone needs more sunlight, it would be Europe. That is true. The funny part is, what's going to happen if they dim the sun and they've been building solar panels to try to go green? Isn't that a bit contradictory? Like, you're trying to get energy from solar panels, and then some other genius has the idea of ironically emitting the same chemical emitted by power plants that justified building the solar panels to replace, and then you dim the sun using the chemicals emitted by the power plants and then affect the solar panels. Like, I wonder, did they actually think about this stuff? Like, do they sit down and look at the whole picture of this? Here's an idea, folks. Let's shut down all the power plants because they're damaging the environment. Let's build massive solar farms from China using extremely dirty mining processes and processing processes, which need to be replaced very often, which actually makes them significantly more environmentally damaging than the power plant. But the good side is we stop the power plant from emitting that chemical. But here's another idea. Let's use that exact same chemical, sulfur dioxide, emitted by that power plant, and just launch it directly into the stratosphere. Let's actually not even have it, just pour into the sky, which actually dissipates, by the way. If it's lower down, it dissipates quicker. Let's just put it right into the stratosphere by using a balloon or airplanes to do it, which is literally what they're doing. And then obviously that'll stop global warming. And good thing we got rid of the power plant that was emitting the same chemical, doing less damage than this thing does. And it'll also block the sun, which will affect the solar panels. I don't know, folks. I don't know. Okay, I take that back. Trust the science. Who are we to question the logic of such things? We are not scientists, folks. I'm not, at least. So, you know what? I'm just got to put the brain on hold and just trust it all, right? Anyways, folks. Sometimes I just don't. Look, I understand some people believe in global warming. Fine. I love the environment. I love nature. I love getting out. I want to preserve the environment. I'm all for it. I just don't see the logic in some of this stuff. I think there are too many contradictions. And I'm also just maybe a little too aware that there's a huge money-making scheme tied to it. There's a lot of money tied to this. And I would argue a lot of people involved in it are not in it because they care about the environment. They're in it because they're trying to make money. It's a business. It's a massive business, right? which is why a lot of the investment firms are involved in it, by the way. It's not because they care about the environment. Another question here, Norway for Trump. You're saying, in fact, communist China's SO release talking about sulfur oxide, I believe, released into the atmosphere is the only one visible from the Earth's orbit. Sulfur dioxide, I'm sorry, SO. You're saying China's sulfur dioxide released into the atmosphere is the only one visible from the Earth's orbit. Wow, all right. And Chinese sulfur, SO2, of course, pollution is strong enough to change the climate in California. Another big part of this argument is that when they make the Paris Climate Accord and they forbid the United States and Europe from engaging in basically energy production, what does that do? Well, they don't make the same requirements for India or other developing countries or China. And then China, the biggest polluter on the face of the planet, builds even more heavily polluting power plants, damages the environment literally on the opposite side of the world, has almost no restrictions, and then sells Europe and the United States wind turbines, which they actually stole from us. That goes back to the Obama administration. When they indicted Chinese military hackers, they actually showed in the indictments, in the charges at least, in the indictments, that the Chinese military stole the wind turbine designs from an American company, gave the designs to a Chinese company, and the Chinese company used the stolen wind turbine designs to outbid the American company they robbed in the first place and actually won bidding wars against the company they robbed in the United States and got tax dollars to build turbines in the United States. After beating the company they literally stole the designs from in the first place in that bid. Let that sink in. And even though the hackers were indicted for this, again, they were in China, they were never actually arrested. Even though this was made public, this was still allowed to happen. Let that sink in, folks. And so, yeah, they can do that, and they can build the solar panels and send them here, and then everything else. They can do all that. And then, of course, build some of the most polluting power plants on the earth. I've said before, and I'll say it again, if you want to make clean energy, American conventional power plants are actually some of the cleanest on the face of the planet. Do you know what some of the cleanest energy is? Coal and nuclear. If you don't want nuclear, build coal. And people say, well, coal power plants, and they have images in their minds from the Industrial Revolution or from like China, right? Modern coal power is so clean, by US standards, modern coal power is so clean that the only emission is vapor. It's like water. That's the only emission. If we wanted to stop climate change and save the environment, what we would do is we would go to Africa and we would build them coal-fired power plants. We would build them nuclear power plants. We would build them clean power, and they would not need to use dirty energy, which they use a lot of. If we wanted to save the environment, we'd go to India and we would do contracts with them, and we would build coal-fire and nuclear power plants, and we would make it significantly cleaner there. And I don't think we'd be able to do it in China, but it would basically put the Chinese energy industry out of business, because we could do it better than them, we could do it cleaner than them, and we could do it more effectively than them. And it would basically, get rid of a lot of these pollutants. Why do they not do that? Well, because coal is dirty? No, it's not modern coal. And then they argue that the same thing they're trying to save from going into the atmosphere, they're literally launching balloons and airplanes and injecting it into the stratosphere anyway. Again, this goes back to my point. Maybe I just know the business too much. To me, this is basically a giant racket. I just see it as a massive racket. There are people making a lot of money for it. A lot of this stuff is just inherently contradictory. I do believe there are a lot of people who are bleeding hearts. They genuinely believe they're doing good things. I'm all for reducing pollution, but I know that these things are ironically less polluting, right? Even scientifically, these would be less polluting than what is being done. So why is it not being done? I would say because there's a giant global business behind it. It's a racket. It's a huge racket. Candace Harden, you're saying they're just trolling the liberals by shifting conversation with the Trump third term. Okay, I showed you that Donald Trump, they're now selling a Trump 2028 campaign hat and other merchandise. You can also buy plastic straws, by the way, right? You're saying, I think they're being clever and altering the news feed. I think so too, but here's the thing. It's actually kind of hard to tell with Trump when he's joking or serious. When he first talked about running for president in 2028, I actually thought he was joking. At this point, I don't know if he's joking. And I can say for a fact, there are some key people around him who are in fact looking into the possible legalities of running for another term. And Trump's argument with that is that he believes the 2020 elections were stolen from him. And it's hard to actually fundamentally change a country with your policies unless you have a solid 8 years. Look at what's happening right now. For example, Trump's making all these executive orders. He's doing a lot of things. He's moving things forward. A ton of it is being blocked by federal courts. That means it's going to be delayed maybe a year. All that stuff. And what's going to happen in a year? Well, you're going to see the campaign start for the midterm elections, right? If Democrats can get seats in the House and Senate and push the Republicans out after the midterms, they can use Congress to block Trump. And what does that mean? It means 4 years, he's not going to be able to get everything he wanted to get done. You need 8 years because the first 2 years effectively, you're setting the ball rolling. The legal challenges, all that stuff, then you go into campaign mode during your first term, right? And then basically your third year in office is just your political campaign. So you only really have 2 years to do everything, and then maybe a year after the midterms, depending on how it goes for you, to try to do whatever else. The second term is the continuation of all of that. You're usually not running again, meaning you get the full 4 years. You're not campaigning the last year. And you're able to do a lot more. Most presidents get most of their stuff done during their second term. If you disrupt that, 4 years somebody else, then back 4 years, that break means you kind of have to start the ball rolling all over again. And for Trump, I think this is, for Trump and a lot of people around him, I think this is why they're talking about 2028 in a, I would say, at least semi-serious way. Because they believe because 2020 was, whatever you believed happened in 2020, it prevented Trump from having the full impact he would have had on the United States, even within the 4 years he has right now. And so I actually do think they're serious about it. I do think the hat is kind of them trolling, but I also think that they might actually at least try to do another term. I think they actually might do it. A lot of you are talking about also the FBI arrest of Wisconsin Judge Hannah Dugan over obstruction. Let me show you what Epoch Times said on this real quick, because a lot of you are asking about it. Basically, the story is this: a federal judge and his wife were just arrested, and the allegation is they were harboring a member of the gang Tren de Aragua in their home. They posted photographs with the guy. Let me read you what the Epoch Times says. They say the FBI arrested a Milwaukee County, Wisconsin circuit judge for allegedly assisting an illegal immigrant in evading arrest, FBI Director Kash Patel said on Friday. Judge Hannah Dugan was arrested on obstruction charges by harboring this individual. It says Patel confirmed in a post on social media platform X that has since been deleted. And he said this, quote, "The FBI arrested Judge Hannah Dugan out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin on charges of obstruction after evidence of Judge Dugan obstructing an immigration arrest operation last week," he wrote on X and added, "We believe Judge Dugan intentionally misdirected federal agents away from the subject to be arrested in her house." That's the judge's wife, I believe. This is Eduardo Flores rules, allowing the subject, an illegal alien, to evade arrest. It notes that Cash Patel added, it's a female judge. Cash Patel added that Flores Ruse is also in federal custody. Now, folks, remember, innocent until proven guilty. This is significant on a couple levels, in my opinion. One is they just arrested a federal judge. That's really big. Sorry, the wife was not corrected. I need to correct that. The wife was not arrested, just the judge. Right? Just the judge being a woman. They just arrested a judge, folks. That is massive. And one of the reasons is you don't normally see judges. Judges oftentimes have a lot of protection. It is very hard to go after a judge. You could argue that part of that is because, with the justice system, it's a little controversial for the government to go after judges because it can look like you're kind of basically targeting political enemies, right? The exception to that, if the judge commits a really serious crime, you do see judges very rarely, but it does happen, get charged with really serious crimes. And that's usually if they're involved in corruption or something else. The judge being arrested is major on that ground. Again, innocent until proven guilty. We will see what comes out from this. But the other big thing, arguably just as big, and I would actually say even bigger, is what has Tom Homan repeatedly been saying? What has he been saying over and over and over again? He's been dealing with local officials, government employees, mayors, governors, even elected, members of Congress, suggesting that they will act to block ICE or federal agents from deporting illegal immigrants. Now, they've noted, in one confrontation, the individual said, "I'm willing to go to jail for this." And Tom Homan responded, "Well, he's willing to go to jail. I'm willing to put him in jail." Right? And you also had some elected officials even saying publicly that they were going to, protect illegal immigrants in their homes after they were called out on it. They denied it and so on. You just saw a judge get arrested for that. A judge. And this could suggest that more arrests like this are coming because without a doubt, Tom Homan has also alleged that even sanctuary city laws, which prevent local law enforcement from working and cooperating with ICE, that could be viewed as obstruction. Policies in place to obstruct the deportation of people who are, again, they might have lawful deportation orders on. That could be seen as obstruction. The judge is now being charged with obstruction. Okay, I should note, this is actually, I'm actually a little confused. This is a different case. The other case was with the judge and his wife. This is two judges. Okay, this is where I'm confused. There was another case that involved a judge and his wife, and they got arrested, and now another judge was arrested. Okay, that's why I'm confused. Let me show you the other case. This is Fox News. Yesterday, it says ex-New Mexico judge and wife arrested for allegedly harboring illegal Tren de Aragua member. So the case that just happened was this female judge was harboring an illegal immigrant and allegedly obstructed the Justice Department from arresting him. That is the current one. The previous one that I had this confused with was another case where a judge and his wife were allegedly harboring a member of Tren de Aragua, and both of them were arrested. So that's why I got this confused. Let me show you what this actually says. Fox News, quote, former Dona Ana County Magistrate Judge Joel Cano and his wife, Nancy Cano, were taken into custody Thursday after federal agents raided their Las Cruces home. The two faced charges of evidence tampering amid allegations they harbored Christian Ortega Lopez, an alleged illegal alien who was also believed to be a member of Venezuela's notorious Tren de Aragua gang. And notes the arrest follows a February incident where Ortega Lopez was apprehended at the Cano residence. Court documents revealed that he was initially hired by Nancy Cano for home repairs and later offered accommodations in the couple's guest house. That is massive, folks. The other big thing I'm waiting to see is whether, again, if they can prove the guy was a Tren de Aragua member, whether that could also include aiding and abetting a terrorist. I don't know if they're going to go that far. And one more part here, it says, investigators uncovered evidence linking Ortega Lopez to the Tren de Aragua gang, including gang-related clothing, tattoos, voicemails, and text messages. That's huge. Now, I know I'm going a bit longer today. Oh, and one more thing. According to court documents, he unlawfully entered the U.S. December 15, 2023 by crossing the border near Eagle Pass, Texas, without inspection or authorization. I actually did some reporting at Eagle Pass, not during the last feature I did, but during the previous one, when I first uncovered the whole program for mass illegal immigration. When I was there were reports of gunfire, like not every single night, going from the Mexico side into the United States. So I mean, it's a pretty crazy area. There's a lot of illegal immigration there. My last piece of analysis, then we'll call it a day, but my last piece, right? The Trump administration has, because of the terrorist designation of these gangs, they have the ability to go very far with this if they choose to. Because, as I showed you in the case where they arrested the guy in Colombia, what was he charged with? He was charged with aiding or abetting a terrorist organization by being engaged in the drug trade. If you wanted to interpret the context of designating these gangs as terrorists, whether it be the cartels or MS-13 or Tren de Aragua, that would mean anybody engaged in the drug trade connected by extension to these terrorist organizations. Anybody harboring one of these gang members, they could be in your home. They could be visiting. They could be staying with you. Anybody giving material support to them, maybe you give them money, maybe you buy something from them, maybe you help them in some way. Technically, and I don't know if they will ever enforce the law to this extent, technically, you could be charged with aiding or abetting a terrorist. That is how serious that designation is. I don't know if they're going to do it. The big issue with the Trump administration right now is actually they have opened the door to do a lot of stuff. They have opened the door to go after a lot of people. The question is, how far will they choose to go with the allotted powers? Because they have been allotted very, very broad powers because, again, of some of these designations. This is more serious than maybe a lot of people may realize on the surface. They could actually go after a lot of these people. Okay, last thing. Therapat, you're asking, Josh, am I doing prime time? Yes, I am doing prime time. Tune in tonight, 8 o'clock p.m. for Prime Time. Prime Time is a show, of course, it's a little more relaxed, a little more off the cuff. They kind of have me on tonight just as a general commentary. So, join us tonight, 8 o'clock p.m. for Prime Time. That's me, Roman Balmakov, and also our associates at NTD, Tiffany Meyer, Cindy Drukier, Chris Bob. It's a fun show. You can watch it on Epoch TV or on NTD. Make sure you tune in for that. That said, folks, happy Friday. I hope you all enjoy your weekend. I will see you all again on Monday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and tonight for prime time, so make sure you tune in. That said, folks, thank you so much for being here. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free. Thank you.